This is Interview, a show where we speak with interaction designers from different fields and learn about the experiences that make the experience makers. I'm Aaron Heath, and today my guest is Dan Auer. Dan's currently a senior UI designer for CBS Interactive, where he works on websites like Giant Bomb and GameSpot. Previously, Dan's worked for a variety of startups and places like Autodesk and Constant Contact. The first 20 or so minutes of this episode are dedicated to Dan's education and work history, and we get a little into the weeds on design terminology and the industry. After that, we jump into his current work and discuss video on the web and a little bit of gaming. There's a bit of audio issues in this episode, so you'll notice some varying levels here and there, and one particularly garbled question. Sorry about that. You'll see what I mean. Dan, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, dude, thanks for having me.
So, we're going to talk a little bit about your history, where you are now. You are a graphic designer, and right now your focus is on, I guess it would be UI design primarily, correct?
Yeah, the funny thing is that when I started out, it was like anybody else that went to graphic design school or I guess just started out in that whole thing. So it was a lot of print and like a little bit of web and those sorts of things, lots of logos, that sort of crap.
Yeah.
But it didn't take that many years, honestly, to switch over to UI and UX. So I've been firmly planted in the user interface and user experience and interaction design, all that sort of stuff. I'm firmly planted in that for some time now.
Yeah, and I want to get back to kind of what you're working on right now with them, but going back to your history a little bit, where'd you go to school? What got you into design?
So what's funny is that school is not the thing that got me into design. When I went to high school, I took a few classes that really, they're the reasons why I got kind of shuffled into UI design and everything, because freshman year, there was a web design class. Like it was completely unheard of because that's the sort of class that you wouldn't imagine being in a high school, just like a public high school. So I took that, and that's where I learned how to write just awful HTML, like in tables. And
they were teaching code in the class?
Yeah, they sure were. Yeah. So, and this was also in the day where you did styles like inline and everything. So comparatively to what we do today, it's just like, it was the worst of the worst. It's like making email templates.
Yeah.
For websites.
So this was like early 2000s about.
Honestly, that was 2000. So I took that back in, like I said, freshman year, and then from there, like with any high school, you kind of get options what you do for electives, and there was no other good reason for me doing it other than my brother doing it, but there was computer science classes. Mm-hmm. So I thought, I'm kind of learning how to write code, which is what I thought markup was, but I was like, all right, so I'm gonna try this out. I'll do it for like 2 semesters or something, and took computer science. So I learned how to write in Pascal and C++. And
it sounds like you had a really nice high school. In a lot of places, those kinds of classes still don't exist. I mean, I went to high school in a kind of a rural area in Delaware. And so our electives were literally, one of the electives was intro to waterfowl and hunting waterfowl. It was crazy. So I would have killed for a class like that.
Yeah, it was amazing too, because when I was going into that computer science class, I had one of the most amazing instructors ever, Norma Hill. I'm never going to forget her, because she had us going through the typical curriculum, just learning how to do basic things like arrays and trees and all these other things, and which half of them feel very archaic now, just being in the web. But what was nice is that she kind of hurried us through the curriculum stuff so that we had extra time through each week, because she gave us an extra project, every single person in that class, to make a video game.
Nice.
And I ended up working on 2 ones while I was in that class. One of them, I just recreated Pong. It had it to where you could play on a computer. Somebody was on the keyboard and somebody was using the mouse. And then another one, I tried to make a space shooter kind of like Galaga.
Mm-hmm.
So I had, made I would generate AI and have them go through patterns and all that sort of stuff. So between that and web design, I really like the idea of working on computers, which was not something I was into beforehand. I was more like reading Lord of the Rings and playing Magic the Gathering and very different things like that. I mean, I played video games.
All of that stuff kind of leads and can push you to that, like thinking about imagining all the things in Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is really interesting because of all of the things surrounding it. the maps and
Mhm.
the language. All of those things are like intensely interesting for people who are in a computer field or design field, because I don't know, I love the tertiary kind of surroundings of that. He like building that world. It goes perfectly with game design or with UI design.
Yeah, yeah. And when I was in high school, I was also playing in bands. I would go to play shows or like just talk with other bands in the area or like in the region. It kind of turned into a barter thing almost, where like I would say like, "Oh yeah, I can make you guys a website if you get us
Mm,
on this bill."
yeah,
Or like, "Yeah, I could definitely do a T-shirt for you guys for $20." That like 20 whole dollars
right.
just to sit at the computer.
Do you think that still works today?
I have no idea.
Or is it like, has it proliferated so much that it's just hard for kids to even like, is it too easy for everyone to make a website because of Squarespace? You can.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. That is not an
Brought to you
advertisement, but
by.
hey, Squarespace, feel free to reach out. That one's free.
Yeah, so honestly, I think that the thing that kids make has changed drastically, because back then it was like t-shirts and like really
Yeah,
awful like HTML websites. But now, I mean, like even when I got into college, there were the kids that were making bank doing like MySpace layouts. So there would be that sort of thing that like they still had that thing that they could do for super cheap and way quicker, because anybody else that was trying to get money doing like little things like that, we can't do it as fast because we have
right.
other stuff going on. So I think kids still have a thing that they can do. I have no idea what that thing
What
is
that thing
anymore.
is, yeah.
Yeah.
You took that class, you took the web design class, and that kind of got you interested in design to a degree. And then you mentioned doing some more computer science classes. And I feel like, especially for kind of our generation, a lot of designers had a similar upbringing. But what made you kind of want to focus on design over going into the more computer science side of things?
Yeah, and that's where things got interesting, and that's why I was holding off talking about school so much, or at least in college, because I originally went to UNC at Greensboro for computer science. That was a school that I got accepted into. It was an hour and a half away. I loved the campus, and it just seemed kind of pretty cool. So I went there, and my first year at college, I did computer science.
Yeah.
But then it finally dawned on me, I think, like within the second semester that I was there, that you had to do a lot of math.
Yeah.
Like you had you had to learn calculus and all these other high level things. And I basically just looked at the curriculum. I was like, not going to do it, bro. Sorry, I'm not wired that way. I ended up kind of switching over to design, but design at UNCG is it's wrapped into the art program, and I think that's where I've got my first taste of realizing that there's a big difference between design and art,
Right.
because everything was very illustrative, everything was very emotional. It was a little bit of a culture shock for me, because I had been coming from something that was very logical
And
and
technical,
something.
yeah.
So I ended up just taking a break from UNCG, like moved back home, and in the interim, while I was trying to figure out my next steps, I took classes at a local community college. But I kept in with the whole design thing,
Yeah.
and was learning a bit there. So that was the first place where I really started to understand that design had technical things in it, which is very surprising, because everybody's like, "Oh, community college, like whatever."
Right. And I was going to say, design is such a big, ambiguous word, and there's so much to it, but there are those elements that are extremely technical, like packaging design and like working within a grid. And when you first kind of did the program at the first college you were at, did you get discouraged and think, oh, this is too, I don't have that art background, design isn't for me?
I well, okay, I guess this underlines my exact feelings of where I was at with design back when I started out at UNCG. I was about to walk into the first day of class with a couple of the people that I ended up becoming very good friends with, and I was like, "This class is bullshit, man. Like, I don't know what I'm going to learn outside of what I already know in Photoshop."
Yeah.
Which is such like an ignorant, just dumb sentence. And but I was like, maybe 19, something like that. So yeah, like I just didn't feel like I belonged. It didn't feel like a good fit, which I
Mhm.
think is a huge thing for anybody that age to be able to say like, this is not a good fit, because so many times you see kids like, oh well, I guess it's just supposed to be hard, and it's really not easy for me to really get into. I don't think that's.
Yeah, but also design is as a career, design is this like weird ephemeral thing that when you're younger, it's not the sort of thing that you kind of see as a career or understand what it is or how big it is or what it can be. I've talked to people before, and maybe like 5 to 10 years before us, they got into design or they learned about it because they didn't know what it was, but they knew they wanted to do it because of album art, or they did it because of skateboarding culture and board design and things like that. But when you're kind of that age and you're trying to figure out what you want to do, it's really hard to know what design is or what you have to be good at or what your background is in. It was kind of scary for me too because I didn't take art classes in high school. I had that very computer science background. That's what I was into in my teenage years. And I liked design and web design around that, just like you said, Photoshop. And so when I went to apply to college to SCAD, which was an art school, I went to the art teacher at my high school and I was like, look, I never took classes with you, but can I show you some of my work? And if you like it, write me a recommendation. And she wouldn't even do that. And it was really discouraging at that point because I was afraid that like, this is too much about art. This isn't right for me. I'm not going to fit in here. And it's kind of a bummer because hopefully that's changing because of Apple and things like that, with industrial design and apps becoming more of the forefront for people to see that design is this bigger picture thing and there's so many aspects of it that you can fit in and that you should try. You don't have to be an illustrator.
Yeah. So, yeah, when I went to the community college, I'm very thankful because there were a few classes that kind of started to spark things with the graphic design side that
Mm-hmm.
I started to resonate with. Like, I took my first typography class. I learned, like the basics. So I had my whole 6 months of like, Helvetica is the best thing ever.
Right.
And yeah, that like everybody goes through it and it's fine. Just got to like shake it out, I
I don't know if
guess.
they do anymore. I think that was kind of a product of that time too.
Yeah. 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 Because it was, well, yeah.
I mean, it
but,
was like we can blame Gary Hustwitz for that.
Yeah. So I started to do classes like that. And I also had a good friend at the time, Lori Shipley. She was an illustrator and designer that did a bunch of band stuff like me. And I'm sure I was the young kid that was screwing up her like client relationship stuff. Like, oh, yeah, I'll do it for $50. Cool. Where Lori had like very reasonable prices and exceptionally good work. But I was talking to her one day trying to figure out where to go next for class or for school. And she very bluntly said, like, I went to SCAD. And I think that if you're looking for something like that, it's going to be super valuable. It's wicked expensive, but it's super valuable. So I applied and I was mulling over that for a long time because there was the price and like all these other factors, like moving to Georgia and, just so many other details.
Because you were from North Carolina, right? Were the colleges you went to still close to home?
Yeah. Yeah. So like I lived in the Raleigh area
So it
and
would have been a
this,
big life adjustment.
yeah. Yeah, so I started to do the application process and I was going over so many things I could do because SCAD's offerings for different kinds of design made me feel
Hmm.
like a kid in a candy store. There's so many
Right.
things I wanted to do and I was just so optimistic about it. And honestly, when I did my first version of the application, it was like all printed out and everything. I put in as my first option for my major to be furniture design
Oh, wow.
because I had done working in middle school before that, and just like I had this just yearning to do stuff with my hands.
Yeah.
So I felt like, oh, if I could go to school for that and end up being like a furniture guy, that would be really cool. I could still
Right.
do the computer stuff and learn, but I ended up just tearing it up and switched over to graphic design. Barely got in, and there, gosh, like going there was probably the best experience I could have for somebody who felt like they wanted to do design, but they didn't know how they wanted to do it because there were so many other people doing.
So many things.
Yeah, like there was industrial designers that you would be in like a 3D design class with, or
Yeah.
like sound people that were in a drawing class because they had to take it.
Yeah,
And
right. Especially with like the design field or games or graphic design, everybody in high school, even people a little older, are always asking, what should I do? Should I go to college or not? And there's
Mhm.
so many resources on the web where really to learn the things you need to know, you don't need to go to college. But at least for me, I feel, and it sounds like for you too, in this field, it helped so much because of the people you meet, the ways your mind opens up because of the other resources you find or the other ways to look at things or kind of those elements around design, like you said, like furniture design. Or my fiance, for example, started going there for photography at first, and then she ended up in graphic design. You're kind of in that mindset already, but once you go there and you're surrounded by all these really passionate people, it just adds something else and it gives you something else to work towards that just looking up tutorials on the web, while that's totally viable, can't.
Yeah, oh yeah. That's one of the biggest reasons why I love that. Is especially because what threw me off, but it was such a good thing, is that when you're applying for housing there, it's almost like you have to do a personal, like an OK Cupid sort of profile
Yeah.
of, this is the sort of music I listen to and this is what I do in my free time and blah 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 blah. And they try to fit you with somebody that they think is going to be a good match.
Hmm.
So I got in, got settled in, and in comes this guy who's 6'3", just wild hair, like facial hair, just a giant. And he comes in and just like very softly is like, "Hey, how's it going? I'm Jason," and it was my new roommate. And it ended up being, to this day, one of the best relationships I've ever had with somebody, because he went in for video game design, and it was just like, it almost really, it felt like a really good match, because I had been playing games for the longest time. I was still into it. And this is a guy who's going to try to do that for a career. And I'm
Yeah.
sitting there as a designer. And what was so good is that we had completely different majors if you look at side by side. But the amount that we would help each other out while we're working in our dorm room was phenomenal.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I would give him advice on like, oh yeah, if you want to do these sorts of icons or like these sorts of graphics or something for part of the UI of what you're building, here's my 2 cents. And then he would look at my stuff and say like, this seems really cold. Like, what if you add in this? What if like you experiment with these sorts of textures?
Yeah.
Coming from his angle, like it was so valuable. But yeah, so like I ended up going to class there on campus for a full year, but then ended up switching home to do e-learning, which is something that SCAD does.
Hmm.
And I did that for the rest of the time that I was doing classes there, mostly because of personal stuff. Then I was doing school remotely full time and then also working full time. So that ended up being a weird combination. So that's kind of where I jumped off into the truly professional world of design.
Yeah, you still got through it all, and you've ended up having a somewhat prolific career in the places you worked at and kinds of positions you've had. Can you just
Mhm.
quickly run through maybe the past few and what your kind of duties were and how they were different?
Yeah, when I was still at SCAD, I was working for a little startup in North Carolina, which sounds totally unheard of, but they do exist. They're like unicorns. But this one was interesting because it was a video game design or video game related startup, like a social network. And the whole idea is that people could upload their gameplay up to the site so other people could see it, which kind of feels like everything that's everywhere these days in video games, because
Right.
we have Twitch and we have YouTube and like all these other little things.
They were ahead of their time.
Yeah, and we had this just god awful setup too, where we the feature that we were selling, which was in beta and broke all the time, was that if you have gameplay that you've clipped in Halo 3, if you submit like your gamer tag and then the exact title of the clip, we will go and fetch it for you and upload it for you onto the site. No
Hmm.
other thing needed. So it was like things like that that were really experimental, and that was also my first real experience in legitimate interaction design, UI design, user experience, all of that.
Hmm.
And me being completely ignorant to the difference between any of those three, I was just like designing stuff in Photoshop, like that would be cool if we did this. Like
Yeah.
the little things like, gosh, this was 2008, and we had the upload screen, and we made a novel concept of the upload page could have multiple tabs to it. So if you wanted to upload multiple videos, you could like line it all up, do all the metadata and everything like that, hit a button, and it just starts to process.
Okay.
Uh, so it was little things like that that were not like a normal thing, but we just wanted to play with this stuff so much. So that was definitely one of the more notable things. I also did a random switch over to doing like agency work, but it was an agency where we were all starting it together at the same time.
Hmm.
And it was just very atmospheric, I guess is a good word to explain it, because it wasn't like a rigid company with office space, like everybody worked from home. We're all basically just pitching how much money that we're trying to get for our contribution to the project.
Hmm.
And but that is the place where I started to do really cool things really early on, because that was also in 2008, and we were doing iPhone apps and
Okay.
we were doing like other things like that. So I ended up getting to design uh, for 2 whole seasons, the iPhone app for the Carolina Hurricanes, which is the NHL
Oh,
team
wow.
down there, and that's still to this day, I'm like, "I did something for NHL, this is cool."
The iPhone really did change things with interaction design, especially just I guess the amount of positions and the amount of base and jobs it kind of created in a way,
Mhm,
especially for this field, is amazing. And it really changed how people consume so much stuff. Like, we're going to talk about your current position in just a couple of minutes, but
mhm.
talking about video, even, like, it changed every kind of content and how we interact with it.
Yeah, yeah, and the thing that I really took away from that was the first time because you're talking about a mobile object.
Yeah.
That was the first place where I really felt like this is more like I'm actually interacting physically with this thing. It's not keyboard and mouse, even though like that's still a physical interaction. It just was
Hmm.
more intimate. And
Yeah.
that's when I became way more aware of like this needs to be larger, this needs to be like in this placement. And that was the fundamental of what you think of as interaction design today, is
Hmm.
that you're trying to reduce the barriers and try to organize things in such a manner that it's easier for the person that is using the thing.
Yeah.
So that was so crucial at the time. But then I think a couple of other notable things I've done in the past is one of them I worked, not even gaming related. It was an email marketing company. It was a competitor to Mailchimp, and there that was one of the most important things that I've ever gotten to do in my career because it was a 12-person design team. It was a larger company, and they were building tools and they were also just building general like interfaces and all of this, and I kind of got
They were
tasked
building
with.
workflows. You were building those
Yeah,
tools for the end user. So it's that the interaction design behind that is incredibly important, especially at that time. I mean, still today, but it's funny because you say a competitor to Mailchimp as if Mailchimp is the de facto now, and then it wasn't.
yeah, oh yeah, well it was funny because even then we were like, oh shit, we really like need to catch up with these guys because they're doing it right. But what was so good about that though is that this was truly the first time where I had other designers in the real world that could help mentor me or tell me that like I had been doing something wrong or just like general criticism that was not in the safety net of a classroom. And my good friend James, like I still catch up with them to this day. He is an interaction designer by trade. Like that's what he went to school for. And he noticed that I was very much interested in it, but very much ignorant to it. Uh, so he took me under his wing and has been a mentor for me for years. So he taught me the basics of like how to do certain processes, how to be able to identify problems, how to make sure like you're not going too quick into a solution and really trying to like dig into things.
Hmm.
And that was also one of my first experiences with true user research.
Talking about coding too, do you think that not every designer, not even every interaction designer, spends time coding? But you do have the background with that, and it sounds like you do it pretty regularly. Do you think that changes how you look at interaction design and even just the aesthetics of things? And like, what kind of effect do you think that has on your work?
Back in the day, it used to affect how I worked so much more because I was trying to think practically of what could be executed. And that would end up introducing a bias in what I designed. That was something that's why I'm very thankful for James, my mentor, is that he would constantly push to say, yes, I know you know how to build that, is that even the right thing to be building in the first place? And
Hmm.
constantly reeling me back and having me think, because I was so ADD about that stuff back then. And be like, oh yeah, we can do this thing and we can do it right now, and it's going to take me 3 days. Uh, and that's not the point. You got to make something
Right.
that's good for the user. So yeah, it definitely used to affect me much more than it does today, and which is why I guess getting to it currently, like you said, I'm working at CBS Interactive, which sounds way more corporate than I guess how we act. Um, because CBS Interactive is a just big conglomerate thing. We have multiple offices. Like I work at the headquarters, but it has a bunch of different groups. I work in the games group, so I work on 2 or 3 websites. But then there's like CNET; they have their own thing. We have a gaggle of other sites that are in other groups and like segmented in a way where they all kind of relate.
What kind of projects, like, what are the touch points you're typically working on?
That's changed since I've been there. What was an interesting thing is that I started there, worked there for a little over a year, and then left to go work at a startup, and then showed right back up 6 months later. And when I went there the first time, the idea was to be the unicorn. It was a designer that could do everything. And those sorts of projects were, it was heavily geared towards that bias that I was just talking about.
What can I build self-sufficiently quickly?
Yeah. Well, it didn't even have to be quickly. It's like, what's the thing that I could take care of by myself?
Hmm.
So we would think of like a big project for us every year is E3. We do a lot of coverage for E3. It's kind of the same predictable sort of stuff, but we try to introduce new things every year to improve the experience. So, like the first time I worked on it, I was working on like schedule modules to show everybody what the live stuff was throughout the day. It would be on the homepage and things like that. So I would think, okay, I'm going to use normal conventions for grabbing data. I'm going to use normal conventions, what we have in our framework for styling it, and really didn't go outside of those bounds. So a lot of the restrictions in my mind and kind of the culture on our team was let's use existing parts to make something to solve the problem that product is giving us. And we have definitely changed
Yeah.
how we do that.
What do you think led to that change?
The biggest thing that changed was, I guess, it came to a point with our team that we realized that we were our own bottlenecks. We are trying to hire people and have people on the team that could do everything all the time. And so I guess the difference between the design team and the engineering team was like design just did a little bit more visual stuff than engineering, and engineering did like all of the back end. Like there was a lot of bleed over in both of
Hmm.
those. And when I came back, like my position had not been filled in 6 months while I was gone. So they decided that they were going to split it out into two things, which was a good indicator for how the dynamic was supposed to change.
Changing. Yeah.
So yeah, so they had it where there was going to be a UI UX designer, which is me, like a senior level one, and then cut out all of the front end stuff and just have somebody dedicated on engineering to handle that stuff.
Hmm.
And that's going back to what we were just talking about of how like I was doing everything, felt like a kid in the candy store. And over the years, my mentality has changed. Like I'm going to do the thing that's missing on our team.
And do it really well and kind of focus in on it.
Yeah. Then like when I came back, they were interviewing me again, even though like I had already worked there on the same
Yeah.
team,
But
because
you
they wanted to see
left.
how.
You left them.
Oh yeah, well part of it was them like this motherfucker. Yeah, oh come
You're right.
crawling
Yeah.
back.
If you're going to do this
Yeah,
to us, we're going to put you through another interview.
yeah. Well, several interviews. Yeah, so they did that, but they also wanted to see if I was going to singularly focus on things around design from what they saw, which is visual design and interaction design.
Hmm.
Then yes, if that's still a good fit, then yeah, we're totally gonna bring it back in. And that's really what I do now is that I focus way more on like interviewing users, trying to understand what problems are. Like we're doing a lot of redesign work now,
Yeah.
and going in and just like really digging into the stuff that hasn't changed in like 3 or 4 years, how the site has changed since then, and trying to get all of it to be how it should be today.
With so many kind of websites you're working on and doing these bigger redesigns, is the team focused on kind of, is it almost patchwork where we're doing these little projects one by one? Do you have kind of a bigger picture redesign in the background that's also being worked on, or are you trying to do both of these things kind of at the same time, or how does that work?
It's even it feels more complicated and simplified than it really is. So as far as the team builds, like we have I think like 8 or 9 engineers or something like that. They handle both sites, which are huge. They get a ton of traffic. And then we have two designers that design everything for both Giant Bomb and GameSpot.
And like you
Uh,
said, that includes kind of events. So even if you're trying to work on these fundamental projects, there's probably always something coming up like a PAX or an E3.
Yeah, and like we have two major events that happen every year, which help dictate when we do things that are not related to those. Because we have E3 and then we have Game of the Year, and thankfully they're about 6 months apart from one another, so at least we have time to like breathe and do other stuff. But yeah,
Yeah.
those are the deadline driven ones. But then the other ones, we do have like little fixes here and there that we like to try to work on. We also have just like fundamental improvements. So we'll say like, oh, like hypothetically, like for Giant Bomb, we said they have a lot of videos. They're not really organized that well. We should probably make like pages for the shows that they do so that people can find these better, and have that as kind of like a decent, like a meaty project that we
Right.
can work on. That's not a full redesign, but at the same time, we're looking now into redesigning Giant Bomb from a lot of different angles, because the way that they do their content and the things that they do now is so far different from what was thought to be done like 4 years ago when they did the redesign,
Yeah.
that we're coming back and we're really doing like fundamental changes of how the site exists now. But that's not exactly something that we do for GameSpot, because the traffic on it is so large that we don't want to just do a wholesale redesign, because that's
Yeah.
probably bad.
Right. They're very different properties. Giant Bomb is interesting too because when it started, especially there was such a big focus on kind of the wiki side of it, and it's become such a media site where their product is their videos and they have so many different programs almost. And the site kind of doesn't reflect that now. So I imagine, like you said, with organizing, the video content, that's a big part of it, is just refactoring all that stuff.
Yeah, so and that's why the job became so much more interesting, because for the whole team, we almost had like a come to Jesus moment where we decided that we really need to give like Giant Bomb the attention that it deserves, and not trying to do little fixes, but really make the site that is what they need now. And you were
Mhm.
totally right. Like the wiki is a gigantic part of the site. It's like there's a whole segment of users that are just for the wiki. And then we have this whole other experience that it's almost like Netflix in a way. Like people subscribe to
Right.
them
Exactly.
monthly or yearly, and they have just a ton of shows. They do a lot of content, and now we're trying to solve the problem of making those things coexist in a way that makes sense.
Video is such a big piece of the web now. It's such an important piece of content. People have been trying to solve TV for years now, and through all that, YouTube has kind of grown up. Netflix has come and totally changed the way we consume things, and Amazon Video and HBO Now and everything like that. So the problem still seems to be that discovery of content and finding what you're looking for, and everybody's working on it. It's funny because back in like 2010, I was working on a project for Xbox, and even that was the big conversation at the time. Like, discovery of games, discovery of video. We have all of this digital content. What's the step-by-step process for someone to find it? It's just something that still hasn't been solved.
Yeah, and it's funny looking back, especially while we're talking about it now, is that my mentality of what I work on and like what I give any sorts of craps about has fundamentally changed, because back in the day it was trying to make something beautiful and make something
Hmm.
that was engaging, and worrying about the little details, worrying about fonts and all this. And if that discussion comes up in the office now, I usually just turn around and say, does that really matter? Because the thing that we're trying to solve is trying to get more users to realize this thing exists. Like
Hmm.
trying to get people to say, or like saying, like, oh yeah, if this site is full of 3-hour videos, should we not have something where like if they leave halfway through it and come back, we show them where they left off and like go from there?
Yeah.
Because it's a very different mentality. And also it's very much to the same point as earlier, that design is such an ephemeral, just such a large scope, fuzzy, weird thing that has so many different definitions to it, that
Right.
technically, yeah, I'm still a designer doing design work, but what I was doing 10 years ago and what I'm doing now are fundamentally different jobs.
Yeah. There's a clear process to kind of how you got there. And it's those experiences that seem like they help you now. I think it's necessary for people going to school today. You can't just be a designer. You have to be a designer, and there's so much to it, like we've said a couple times now, and you have to kind of focus in on that extra thing, but also be a jack of all trades. Talking about the team too, in games especially, there's some of this going on right now that people like people like to find one person and put the blame on them, as if this entire decision or this design element is all because of this one person. If there's an issue I'm having, it's because of this one person. But that's not the case. And it's not just that you have a team you're working with of other designers. I'm sure in CBSi especially, you have people in advertising, you have the content creators themselves, you have the people working at GameSpot and Giant Bomb. You have all of these other groups who are vying and have their own concept and vision of what this thing needs to be, that like a specific feature, the implementation of a design doesn't just fall to you.
Yeah, and that's there have been times in my career, and everybody I think goes through this, where you feel like I am the decision maker. I am the one who makes the design decisions, and it will be designed and it will be great. And almost having this dictatorship sort of mentality, like if I say it, it will be built. And I am so far away from that, where most days that I'm working on something, I am talking to content, or I'm talking to our growth team, or I'm talking to engineering, or just like higher ups. It changes every day, especially with the project that we're working on.
Yeah,
That kind of it drives you to realize that you are a key player, but nonetheless one player of many in a thing that needs to exist. You saying that review pages need to act and feel a certain way is not entirely really up to you. It's about the people that are making the content. It's also the people that are reading it. So you're there not necessarily as a service, but as somebody who can
kind of
help
a
solve the problem.
facilitator.
Well, yeah, and also just like somebody who could help solve the problem with you together from a different angle. And like
Mm-hmm.
that's why I really don't resonate with designers today that say like, oh, yeah, design's the driving force of startups, or like little things that you see on like Medium or whatever, saying like, oh yeah, like design is the future. Design is one of many futures that involves more than just you. It involves other really talented professionals that just see stuff that you're not going to.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I was saying that I think to be successful nowadays, like a designer has to be a designer and something else, not because they need to do it all themselves, but because they need to understand where other people are coming from. They need to understand where the computer scientists, where those engineers are coming from. They need to understand where the business people and like, oh, it's pie in the sky. I'd love to make this, but the reality is we need to make money. We need to sustain ourselves.
Yeah, and especially working in editorially driven things like news and reviews and video stuff, you get a really good feel of why everything exists the way it does. Like, yeah, okay, of course there's going to be a leaderboard and an MPU here for display ads. Like, the reason it exists is because of these numbers, because of these business decisions, because otherwise we're not making our paychecks. And you're like, okay, totally reasonable. Yes, I will put 2 ads on the page because I like my paycheck and I like the thing that I work on. So I'm going to continue to do that. And it's
Sure.
like the thing that I worry about is that people say like, oh, that's a compromise. That's a really bad way of looking at this. It's not. It's still one of the fundamentals of design from the angle that I see it is that you take the constraints that you have, you take some of the compromises that are there on the table, and you use those to help drive the thing that you're going to make so that it's still good for everybody. And
Right.
if you shove it all off the table and say, no, we're not going to do that, we're going to do it this way, that is not looking at it from a business perspective. It's not looking at it from
Yeah.
other perspectives that you don't have. So it's kind of mirroring what you're saying, where you have to be a designer and plus this. And sometimes you don't even have to be that extra thing. You just have to listen to them, and you
Yeah.
just have to you have to let your brain switch on and your mouth switch off so that you can just soak in stuff that you didn't know beforehand.
And I like what you were saying about compromises in business and in design, especially. Design is compromises. Design is taking a set of compromises or taking a set of things and finding the compromises between them. And to look at it, to try to design without those compromises is unrealistic. It's just not the way the world works. And it's kind of what makes design interesting. So one more thing I want to talk about. The last project you guys just finished up was you were working on the CBSi video player. You have a Medium post about that and kind of some of the updates. With that project, like we were talking about a minute ago with Netflix and Twitch and YouTube, these big players investing so much into it. When you were working on that, did you feel like you were kind of just retreading ground, that some of those problems had been solved?
Yeah, with that one, like I think we're all excited to put it out here in like a week or two. The angle that I took is that we have a video player that exists. A lot of video players also exist on sites that are even larger than us that have dedicated teams just for that one object on a page. My mentality was more like other people have solved problems with this that we can kind of look to and we could just kind of grow off of and introduce those things into other problems that we have that other people don't. Like we have a myriad of ways that somebody can have that video display on the page, like where it's placed, how big it is. I think we have like 4 or 5 different options if you include being able to stream to Chromecast. So we took like just fundamental stuff that other people were doing, made that like a bouncing board essentially, and then started to explore more ways that we should be doing this ourselves. And that's definitely a project that is a very practical thing for us mentally because it was just trying to get things a little bit more streamlined, get a little bit more presentable from what we had originally.
Looking at Giant Bomb and looking at GameSpot, and they're kind of like unique places as products. What do you think the biggest challenges are that you guys and your team are facing next?
For me, there's a whole collection of problems that I pretty much think about 5 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week, depending on the week. But there are things like constantly updating both GameSpot and Giant Bomb to reduce the amount of like clutter on the pages, make things more clear, focus more on the things that people actually want, like reading the news. That's a really big thing on GameSpot. So if somebody's reading that page, we should make it to where it's easy for them to focus on that and not on other things.
Sure.
There's more fundamental stuff like Giant Bomb. We are doing redesign stuff right now, and that is a really big, really meaty project because we're just catching things up to how those guys do their content these days. So like that's a gigantic project. But I would say that design doesn't necessarily drive a lot of the problem solving that we have on the team. Like there's little things that we'll want to fix because we care or that's the angle that we see it. But other things like there'll be a new business opportunity that pops up saying like, hey, if we do this thing, it's going to help provide this for the business, which is super valuable. Here's the reason why. And we sit back and say, that's totally reasonable. Let's dig in. So thankfully, it's not like I guess a game reference, like you're not gunning it to try to get to the final boss, defeat it, and then it's done. Like that doesn't exist on our sites,
Yeah.
really. Where a lot of it is just a series of mini bosses. We can kind of tackle things as they come, new stuff introduces, and it kind of feels good that like you don't necessarily know the giant thing that you're going to tackle in like a year. It's also great for job security.
There's always something.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I can't think of anything other major stuff that isn't already super apparent.
It's just kind of chipping away. And so it's March 2017, and it is kind of a crazy time for video games right now. So many kind of amazing things have just come out. Have you been playing anything recently?
Oh Christ. Yeah, I jumped into Zelda and that has kind of ruined my free time. Which is it's funny because like I started working on video game news sites and content sites.
Yeah.
I've been playing less. And part of it is that like if you play it, it's a little bit of escapism a lot of times. And for me, like I go to work and people are playing video games. So it's not really the hardest place to be at.
Yeah.
And also you get like you kind of get the fix too that you see other people playing, you can ask questions and kind of like join in or something like that. So I don't really play that much anymore, but when I do, I try to make sure that like, oh, it's got to be worth it because then
You're investing that time.
yeah, and it's also like you're working around video games all day and then you go home with more video games.
How's Zelda been?
Oh man, it's so good. It's the sort of game that is good for me because there's certain things that like either I need monotony or I need something that just like feels good.
Yeah.
And like I'll say the monotony is something that I could find in like Civ 6.
Sure.
And that makes it sound bad, but it's a wonderful game that like it's repetitive actions that you're taking with a lot of decision making. So cool. But Zelda, it's just so goddamn pretty. Like I frolic in the grassy knoll
Right.
all over that.
It's really relaxing because I like it a lot because, some games are more intense, like Nier. You're having to dodge a lot or things like that, or even Horizon. And some games are more story focused, so you kind of have to pay attention. And with Zelda, it's so open in a way that you can just turn your brain off if you want and like explore this little area for 30 minutes and just find a chest here or there, or you can go and find a shrine if you want, that kind of puzzle fix or anything like that. So it kind of adapts to, I think it's so good because it works with whatever mood you're in, where a lot of games don't, and that's why you put them down and you're tired from work and you don't want to play something. But with Zelda, it's just like, I'm here for you. All right, just one more question. In your day-to-day life, what's something that you end up using every day that like is constantly frustrating, or that you think could use, an improvement to the interaction, whether it's a bus ticket or an application or, anything like that? Is what's giving you grief? What would you change?
I love this question because I've been on this process for a couple of years now, just removing things everywhere.
Yeah.
So like stuff in the apartments or like apps on my phone. Also, like I've significantly reduced like people I follow or connect with on like social media. Like I have this hard rule now where I'm like, if I don't interact with them at this threshold, they probably have my cell phone number. They could text me anytime. Like it's like that sort of process.
Yeah.
So it's gotten harder for me to have stuff around that I just really don't like,
Yeah.
and or stuff that's frustrating. But there's still barriers, anyways. I will say like Clipper cards, which for anybody that's not in the Bay Area, it's that plastic card that you can use for buses and for just like general public transit. And gosh, like I actually have to get a replacement for mine now because I went to go tag it at a bus and it just didn't work anymore.
Huh.
And it's like it happens so often. I'm like, come on, guys, just like make it so it works. So that is definitely a thing that I wish would just get fixed. Aside from that, all the stuff around me is reasonable. Oh no, there is actually one thing, and I'm staring right now. Apple displays drive me batshit insane. I built a PC so I could play games on it. Like I did that a couple of years ago, and wanted to go hook this thing up to it so that I could just use one screen for two different machines. That was the ideal world. Less
Yeah.
stuff around the apartment. Great. And they use the Thunderbolt
Yeah.
Lightning, one of those things? Yeah, Thunderbolt. And it just is not at all compatible with PC. Like you have to find special video cards, and like once you get into the point where you're saying, "Oh, I need the specific video card for like you've lost."
All right, well, that's all the questions I have. Dan, thanks so much for talking with me. Is there anything you want to kind of pitch? Anything else going on in your life you want to mention?
I will say thanks for having me on the show. It was amazing. And I think if people want to keep up with all my terrible tweets, you can definitely find me on there. I'm just at Dan Auer.
And people can look forward to seeing, I guess, some more giant bomb changes upcoming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 And thanks for reminding me because you said it earlier that we're starting to do more stuff on Medium. So I think if you just follow me on there, I'm going to be posting semi regularly.
Oh, cool.
Really, it's whenever we finish something and we're putting it out, we're pretty much going to announce it there. So if you're interested either in what our team does or like what I'm designing or something like that, it's all going to be sitting right there or in tweets or whatever. But if you're in for like real design stuff, definitely do Medium because there's way too many fart jokes I do on Twitter. So
I will make sure both of those, whether you're interested in fart jokes or design, are listed. Both of those links are listed in the show notes. So thanks again, Dan.
all right, thank you.
Like Dan said, you can find him on Twitter, and he and the team at CBSi are now posting about completed projects on Medium. You can find those links in the show notes. If you're involved with interaction design in any way, or you know someone who you think would be an interesting fit on the show, please send them my way. Hit me up at Twitter or send me an email. Aside from that, let me know your thoughts on the show, and check out the Review YouTube channel for videos and critiques around interaction design in games. As always, thanks for listening.